Good morning, everybody. So the good news is we don't have a computer screen anymore, and I can sit down and have a more genuine conversation. And the reason for this pivot, as I spoke to Larry, is that I felt I was being redundant in my teaching because through all the different prophetical sections of the Hebrew Bible, we see them as foretelling a future king or to get back on some moral purpose of Torah, a mitzvot, prevention of idolatry. That's the way we see it, period. And if Jews believed if it was, in fact, indeed a prediction for Jesus of Nazareth, we would be a lot different today. Christians, on the other hand, New Testament writers relied heavily on prophetic predictions, and all of them are Jesus. So it was a fun, engaging 5 classes, but I felt I was going on autopilot. So now, I want this to be an opportunity for you to ask, frankly, anything you want regarding what we've done last year with regard to parabolic discussions, prophetic discussions, the state of Judaism. This is an opportunity for you to challenge me, to question me, to ask a question. This is all for you, okay? So let's have it. Does that sound okay? I didn't know what else to teach in the prophetic section. I felt, again, I was just repeating myself, and I didn't want you to fall asleep. Oh, I made this joke in the high holidays. Larry, I don't know if you saw it, but oftentimes congregants would do this. Lynn and Mark, I know one congregant in particular who's perfected sleeping while standing. And did you hear what I said? I'll tell you later. And they say they focus. So who has something for me? You want to go for it? Go ahead, Larry. Okay. Okay. Raise your hand if you're not familiar with the book of Daniel. It's familiar. It's familiar. So let me back up. In a New Revised Standard Edition, a Christian Bible or an academic Bible, it's found in the book of Prophets. He's a person who has prophetic images, especially when he sleeps. The scene that takes place, that he is in the Babylonian court, dealing with Babylonian monarchs, and he's an exiled Jew priest, more than likely, who is writing his visions. That's the book of Daniel. It's a hybrid text, meaning it's really hard to translate because it's both written in Aramaic and Hebrew, sheluva, combination. That's the book of Daniel. So for literature, if we were going to do a literature understanding of it, It's very prophetic. However, the issue is dating. You got dating, not I'm going on a date with Rachel. More like, dating of time. Everyone who's seen here or read the Dan Brown books, Dan Brown, okay. So I forget which book. I think it's the one where, what's the Da Vinci Code? They have images of the Council of Nicaea. It's when the church got together early and they canonized the New Testament in order. And they put in what books would remain and what books would not. And we have like the infancy gospels, all a bunch of stuff. Infancy gospel of Thomas, some made it and some didn't make it. We really don't have that moment in Jewish history where we can pinpoint when we canonize the Hebrew Bible. And the reason why that's so hard is because of the various exiles. Certain things just became more important. For example, when we follow the Talmud, it's the Babylonian Talmud. There's also something called the Jerusalem Talmud. Nobody studies the Jerusalem Talmud. It's very esoteric, and very few people study it. So the reason why I want to say early rabbinic periods put the book of Daniel in the writing section is because we know that the book of Daniel, the author, is not writing in Bavel in Babylonia. He's writing in Eretz Yisrael. And he is considered, call him in Upton Sinclair, a muckraker. I don't think we teach this anymore at Mountain Brook High School, that like the power of journalism and writing, that he's using the power of pen to convey the socioeconomic injustices being committed by the Greeks. And if you were to look at Daniel chapter 7, it's a weird participle, and Daniel dreamt a dreaming. It's really weird, and he has these visions of 4 beasts coming out of the ocean. It's a great drawing exercise, and these beasts are terrifying. They refer to the Persians, the Medes, the Babylonians, but the last beast, this beast was devouring the other beast. It had arrogant speech, and had horns and 10 horns coming out of each horn. It's a trip. It's a trip. It's a real trip. But if you were to look at an Orthodox commentary, they think Daniel's talking about the Roman Empire. It's not. The Orthodox commentary are 100% wrong. It's midrash. It's allegories, homilies underneath the scripture. The fun meaning. He's talking about the Greeks. These are the successors of Alexander the Great. And he's writing in a time when we're about to celebrate this next week. Antiochus III was a good Greek landover of Israel. He just let them do their thing as long as they pay the taxes. But Antiochus IV, his son, was horrible. You know that show, The Prophet? No pun intended, by Marcus Lemonis. You know that show? He fixes businesses. And he talks about when it passes over from generation, it has like a 40 to 60% chance of failure. Just, taking over businesses, it's not really good in business. I'm thinking of like all the ones in the retail, okay. And he fixes it. But Daniel's saying life stinks, and I want the people to know what's going on against us. So, and therefore, because he's writing during the Seleucids, we historically put it in the writings, but we rarely study it. But it's also really important, and I want to say it's Daniel 9 and 12. We have the notion that's first introduced to us of bodily resurrection. And I say that if I were in a shul, and I were going to go up there and say, we're going to talk about the bodily resurrection, I'm going to pick on Mark here, who used to co-chair the ritual committee. I get a call and said, Rabbi, what's going on with this conversation about bodily resurrection? And I would say, that's a good question, but it's very Jewish. And he's going to say to me, how is it Jewish? I said, well, we got the party started to a certain extent, and we just don't really talk about it. But on the other hand, we pray for it every single day when we say Micha HaMetim, God who resurrects the dead in the Gevurot. I think we're probably the only Reformed shul who says that line, believe it or not. No, Daniel 12 talks about, in 9, about this anointed figure who will resurrect the dead. And I know it's past Halloween and it's idolatry, but I just think of Thriller, they're coming out of the grave and everything. But That's why the text is important. But it's one of those things that Jews rarely study. I hope I answered your question. Did I? It's dating. It's dating. It's just a difference of dating. I see that. You're perseverating. You got to. What's up? You? Yeah. Yes. So that's, and I'm going to respond. I think that's Amy Jill Levine's mission, and then those who study Amy Jill Levine and other Jewish professors, of the Professor Josh Garraway, he's the one at Hebrew Union College. He's a rabbi, and his doctorate is from Duke in early Christianity, and his official title is Second Temple Commonwealth. That's a mouthful. So here's where we're at. When we look at the New Testament, and I have no problem calling it the Old Testament versus the New Testament when I'm in an academic or I'm in a church. I don't call it the Christian scriptures because I don't think you call it. I think you call it the Bible or New Testament, and I have an obligation to respect your faith. Period. In the I think Matthew, Mark, and Luke, I think they wanted a synagogue that engaged in first century Jewish ritual, whatever that looked like then, while believing in Jesus as this anointed, we can say, Son of God figure or Son of Man figure. And I don't think they were offline, because in my first class last year, I talked about there were different messianic figures pre and post first century that Jewish communities truly thought that this person was the figure. And there's a group of Jews today who believe in a very famous rabbi who will come again and be the Moshiach. Some do, some don't, but it's still within the norms of contemporary Jewish praxis. Chabad, with Menachem Schneerson. Some people believe that he's going to come back as the Moshiach. And I could say this, that I don't find their belief wrong. There is a notion in Judaism that when the Moshiach comes, that it's going to be, that's it. It's no more pain and suffering. But Menachem Schneerson was so influential in the 20th century. There has never been any rabbi like him, period. No one has had such a greater impact to Judaism than Menachem Schneerson. When he came to this country in 770 Parkway in New York, sending Jewish emissaries throughout the world, engaging in a form of Judaism that is just joyful in love, even though it's Orthodox, you get what you get, and they're family units. And it's the growing Jewish movement in this country. And the way he spoke to people, his conversations in Yiddish, there's something in the way he spoke that you want to cry when you hear him speak. But that's why he was so loved, and no one has ever been as influential as him. And that's why he had such a strong following. And they never named a successor. And people go to his grave, and they take wedding photos. I'm not kidding. So that's the Rebbe. So in Jewish communities in the first century, I don't think Matthew and Paul knew each other, but they had a vision of what this Jesus figure was going to look like. And Paul, in the Acts of the Apostles, I think deep down, even though he had this conversion experience from Saul to Paul, he wrestled with his identity throughout his entire life. It was a struggle. And at first hand, he tried to take the mission to synagogues throughout Eretz Yisrael, and it wasn't sticking. And it wasn't going to stick. And as successful as Chabad or Reform or Conservative Judaism, Jewish groups were not, I don't want to say, is it monolithic? We have a core set of beliefs, but we're going to follow different leaders or our own values. In Israel, you have a myriad of Jewish communities from ultra-Orthodox communities in Europe. They follow their local rabbi, not the rabbinic authority in Jerusalem. So with Paul, he was looking at success rates. And when you go to, I know the word is Gentile, or ethnos, that's the Greek, ethnos. Pagans, whatever paganism looked like. I think there's I'm not saying it was the lowest common denominator of people, but when you're in the Mediterranean world and there's a hierarchy of slaves and wealth and poverty, and there's a message of good news and eternal life, it spreads. And yeah, it sounds good, and there's a success rate, and there is animosity. We know that in the Talmud there's tension between a rising form of Jewish Christians. Now, some Jews did do it versus the Jewish communities, and there's something called the Shemona Esrei. It's it says it's 18 blessings that we say every single day, except for Shabbat. We get rid of the petitionary prayers because God gets a break from our prayers request on Shabbat. But they're really 19 blessings. It's not 18, it's 19. And the 19th blessing is the blessing against the heretics. We don't have it in our, it's a blessing against the heretics. And so a lot of supersessionism sees this as Jews being arrogant to cursing the Jewish Christians, but in the first century, it was common to have religious squabbling. But when they became the Holy Roman Empire, that's what really changed everything. So I don't know if Paul envisioned there to be a big church with a big C with a hierarchical structure. If you were to have a conversation with Peter and, what's the Pope's new name? Pope Leo? I would be a fascinating conversation. Is this really the key of the church, the rock of the church that I give to you? That an individual, a human, can be infallible. That the notion of perfection in Judaism is inherently it's null and void. Even Avraham Avinu, Abraham our father, I talked about this on Friday night. It says in Genesis 22:1 during the Akedah, the sacrifice of Isaac, that the Hebrew word is Adonai Elohim Avraham Nisa tested Abraham, but the Midrash says it's elevated Abraham. He had such remarkable status in his kindness and his personal sacrifice to lead this journey. That's the only time we ever see such a verb used to describe a human being. So we are the opposite of being perfect. So that's why it would be a fascinating conversation, because I don't want to say we're all sinners, because that's very Christian, but we say that too. But in Judaism, the word chet, sin, doesn't mean sin. Chet, it means we're frequently missing the markers. We miss the mark. We miss the mark. We miss the mark. That's how. And we don't say this too. And every day in Jewish, we don't say this Reformed tradition. It's we do our daily confessions. We say Al Hashachatanu Lifanecha. Not that. Sorry. Al Shamnu Baganu. We do our confessions every single day. We don't do it because Reformed Judaism had some issues. More. Come on, guys. Throw anything at me. Go ahead. Okay. So Sadducees were the priests, Tzedakим, and that you only got that through paternal birthright. And you could remove, your priestly status could be removed. If you married a divorcee. But the priest, it's kind of like ROTC, they would have rotations of who would come in from various parts to do the sacrificing. But the problem is, after Daniel defeated the Greeks and we had this unbelievable success, the Hasmoneans, Judah the Maccabee, okay? These were priestly zealots. And the problem is that the priest cannot become the monarchs. I'm not calling it a separation of church and state. I know there is no such thing as a separation of church and state. It's the Congress shall not endorse a religion. People get, am I right, Your Honor? Okay. Shall not endorse a religion. It's a case law, but that's what it actually says, am I right? So, but you can't be a priest and a king at the same time. They become both. And it gets corrupt. And they start adopting Greek names, and they're worried about the Romans, and they want to stay in power. And I'm gonna be very political here. It's actually not political, because I believe it's a conversation about Jewish self-determination. Is that a lot of people in New York are worried about, I'm going to give you a perfect example, Zoran Mamdani. They just released, the Democratic Socialist America just released the first part of his agenda. I don't know if you've seen it. Everything has to do with arresting Netanyahu, arresting any IDF soldier, going after any Jewish nonprofit that funds Israel or gives anything. It talks about divesting from all pension funds. It's all against the Jews in Israel. That's the first thing on his agenda through the Democratic Socialists of America. That's his political party, okay? And personally, I'm going to New York for a fellowship presentation next week. I would be in New York yesterday, fighting for. I'm not afraid. And a reason why I'm saying this about Zoran Mamdani, who I firmly believe is an anti-Semite, and he is ideologically in line with Hezbollah and Hamas because he doesn't believe they need to turn down their weapons. But it's only a matter of time, in my humble opinion, because I know the nature of human power. We all do. That when he becomes mayor of New York, and I imagine there's significant perks to becoming the mayor of New York. You live in the mayor's mansion, wherever that is. You have a detail service. You get paid. You're the biggest mayor in the biggest town, and he's going to like being in power. I'm going to make that assumption. When you get a taste of it, you really like it, and it's hard to let go, right? That's human nature. And, do I think he's going to pivot? Yeah, I think he's going to have to pivot because you can't hate Jews and be successful, and you can't have free buses. And so, but the problem with the Hasmoneans, I'll get your question, is that they tried to do both. Zoran can't be both because the amount of lawsuits that are going to happen, because you can't really go after a single group of people. It's against, I think, Title VI of the Civil Rights Act? That's up your area to a certain extent. Discrimination, college campuses. So they got corrupt. And so that's why you saw in the first century when you had the Pharisees, the separatists, even though Jesus was arguing with the Pharisees, Jesus and the Pharisees had something in common. They both hated the priests because they failed to do their duty of representing the sacrificial system. So the Pharisees, the separatists, they were trying to make Judaism more democratic. And I think Jesus is a combination of it, an Hasidic Jew, nomadic, even though I really think he was. It's hard to believe that a young Jewish man would not have been set up by his mother. Really, okay, so that's the Dan Brownism, but it's being monastic, like the Essenes. The reason why you don't want the Essenes, do you know why they died out? You can't have babies, and it's antithesis to. That's why when the John Carroll students say, "Can rabbis have sex?" I say no, but I have 3 kids, and they all look at me like, "How is that possible?" John Carroll, Catholic high school. You had another question? Yeah. Sure. I would. So I would say this. it's patriotic to criticize one's government. Okay? Two, when you started the Students in Justice in Palestine, an organization that's been under investigation by federal authorities, and he went to college in Bode and he started that chapter. Second, he's called for globalizing the intifada. Intifada does not mean a spiritual uprising. It's a call for mass revolution and murder against the Jewish state. Three, when you say free, free Palestine, and from the river to the sea, that is the complete destruction of the Jewish state of Israel in its entirety. When he said that the boots of the NYPD have been laced up by the IDF, I firmly believe in my heart he is a ideological Jew hater. His parents, the way he was reared, so that's when we look at his rhetoric and what he said on the record. There's no doubt in my core, I believe he's not just a threat to Jewish self-determination, but a threat to Western values. I think churches are in trouble. I think he has a world order that he wants to see through. So putting Netanyahu's government aside, and keep in mind that Netanyahu was duly elected by the citizens of Israel and they have a coalition government. Yeah, Trump was duly elected president. And so, but here's the thing. We have state government, we have city government, we have all sorts of government. I believe that countries, you can criticize everything, and I think, I always see the silver lining in things. I think I always believe in the idea that countries will be okay as long as there's active Tocqueville participation. So every week in Israel, they protest against the Netanyahu government. They have one of the biggest gay pride festivals in the world. It is still one of the most progressive countries to this date. On top of that, Netanyahu, most people don't realize this, he governs domestically center-left. See, in Israel, right-wing, left-wing is not like America, right-wing, left-wing. Right-wing Israel is pro-military, left-wing is dove. But Netanyahu, throughout all of his internal policies, he always governs center-left. He's like domestically, he's like a Bill Clinton. These are the things that, when you hyper-focus on a country, you don't zoom out, you can't see everything. So that's what I like to tell people about the coalition government that happens in Israel. And people forget, the previous government, which was, it was platoon, Naftali Bennett, he is way more right than Benjamin Netanyahu, way more right. His party was made up of Islamists in his coalition, actual Israeli Islamist parties. That's how crazy this is. So when you look at all the different nuances in the state of Israel, that you have Muslims in the IDF, you have a Druze community, everyone has the right to self-determination who's an Israeli citizen. You can be as successful as humanly possible. So the hyper-focus on the state of Israel, that's the anti-Semitism. It's to delegitimize, it's the double standard. Well, what's going on in the Sudan? I haven't heard anything, crickets. What's going on in Congo? So when you have a hyper-focus on the state of Israel, that's when we go on the offense. So that's, my example with the priest, I think works well with Mamdani, because you have to be a president for all Americans, okay? And you have to be a judge for all citizens. When you're an elected official or a priest, I think this is Jesus' complaint, when he flipped the money exchange, yeah, you would exchange money at the temple to get your sacrifice. I think Jesus was fed up with the corruption. And I think it's a bold act. And we see time after time how Jewish communities would revolt against problematic leadership. It's in our DNA to say, this isn't working well for us, we want to change. They just wrote it down. They just wrote it down. You had scribes who wrote it down, and the oral tradition. Yeah, the oral tradition. And then eventually, with the destruction of the second temple in 70 BCE, there's this beautiful midrash that Yochanan ben Zakkai, who is the father, he was hid in a coffin and he went to Yavna, which is in the coast near Tel Aviv, and he started the rabbinic academies there. It's a nice story. But people would write the oral tradition down. For example, if we're having this conversation in this room about from Zoran to this, there'd be like students in the rafters writing everything down, and they would write down what we thought we said redacted, and people were redacting what they said, and that it would be studied for generations to come. Come on, guys. Let it happen. You're thinking of something. Yeah. Your mouth was open. No? Bash. Come on, guys. This is your time. No one. Are we live streaming? Are we live? Oh, no. Even better. Come on. This is Vegas. Go ahead. Yeah. The answer, and I'm going to answer both questions. The canon is closed. There's no more prophets. And with MLK's letter, this will be, I'm not going to say it's sacrilegious, but I'm very fond of the legacy of Rabbi Milton Grafman. Rabbi Milton Grafman was the Rabbi at Temple Emmanuel for decades. And he was one of the named recipients in that letter. And his son Stephen is writing a book all based on primary sources. These are primary sources. These are letters, articles from that period in time that paint a totally different picture of what Rabbi Grafman was doing in the civil rights movement. And the reason why it's a closed canon is that I were to have a conversation with MLK. Oh, by the way, John Lewis and Newt Gingrich, when the Rabbi died, Menachem Schneerson, they gave him the Congressional Medal of Honor, and John Lewis said as one of his biggest regrets is that MLK never met the Rabbi, okay? Rabbi Grafman, and this is why we have to close the canon, and this is why we are imperfect, and the prophets were imperfect. Rabbi Grafman was working so hard behind the scenes. You know, this is what he was telling his colleagues in the East Coast. You're not a rabbi down here. You don't have to live here. And all these rabbis would come down, I don't want to say the word cause trouble. They were doing it for the photo op, and they still do it today. They acknowledge in their letters, we did more harm than good coming down to Birmingham for civil rights when they went back to the north. And this drove, and Rabbi Grafman says, you don't know how things are done here because to get rid of, it was Bull Connor. We have a system in how we're going to do it because I have to live here. So he would have the clan call his home, and he had a bullhorn, and he would put the horn, on the phone. He was dealing with, can you imagine if you got threats in the clan living in Birmingham, Alabama, and then being a rabbi and so when the bombing, there was supposed to be a bomb at Bethel. Do you know that? Do you know what was supposed to be at Emmanuel? It's supposed to be at Emmanuel. Because Rabbi Grafman, they made a temple. They got the wrong synagogue. So I will debate it's not revisionist history. What was that? Rabbi, there's an idea that, Emmanuel versus Bethel next, who was more passionate regarding the civil rights. And I want to say for the record that Rabbi Grafman was doing so much for the civil rights movement that they made a mistake and where they planted the bomb. And I think to be that recipient of that letter, talk about the scarlet letter, the mark on his legacy. I think it ate him alive until his final moments on earth. And Stephen, his son, it just looks at primary sources and all, police records. And so that's why I'm a firm believer that the prophetic, everything is closed. To answer your question. And once I'm reading his book, and I can't really, but once it's out, I hope you read it. It's really important for understanding the Jewish involvement in the civil rights, especially for Rabbi Grafman. It's son's book. He's just primary source after primary source. And so when you read the letters of rabbis in New York or Massachusetts coming down here just for the sake of optics, it's the antithesis of Jewish values, but I'm not an optic person. Doing is doing. And just imagine being Jewish here in the 1960s, living, two lives, recognizing you're Jewish and, yes, our skin, but he had a very tough rap in it. Sure. papists, they would call them. Rabbi Newfield, it was very interesting. Because the difference between Rabbi Grafman and Rabbi Newfield, does anyone know, other than these two right here? Rabbi Newfield came, I believe, from Hungary. Okay? He was a classical Reform rabbi. And what does it mean to be a classical Reform rabbi? So in the German-speaking lands, do you know what Jerusalem was for Germans? It's Berlin. Berlin was the new Jerusalem. And for Reform rabbis early in this country, America, you know, the city on the hill, shining hill, however we say it, it was America, not. He was an early Reform American anti-Zionist. And when Rabbi Grafman came, I want to say it was in 1945, right after the war, 1940, I can't remember. Rabbi Grafman was a staunch Zionist. Staunch. When I say staunch, he was one of the early Reform rabbis to break rank and say, we, Temple Emmanuel, we are a Zionist congregation. It was groundbreaking at the time. And we had a schism at Temple Emmanuel. Most people don't know this. There was a family, it's only Lester Siegel. They broke away, and they started their own synagogue. And I think it was near English Village because of the Zionism position. Meaning, yeah, so there's two arguments. That if there's the anti-Zionist rabbis are worried about the notion of dual loyalty. That you can't be loyal for two countries. And two, Rabbi Newfield, the idea was in America we don't need a homeland for Jewish self-determination. It's quite the contrary for so many Jews, and said in order for Jews to have that we have to have our own homeland. So if you believe a Jew says, do you think Jews should have a homeland? And they're going to say, yes, that's Zionism. That's a simple definition of Zionism. That homeland is Eretz Yisrael. And Rabbi Grafman said, you know, even though we're here blessed to be in America, even with our problems, you know, the only way, if we didn't have the state of Israel, everyone in the world would be suffering in some capacity, because that's what we are the recipients of what the state of Israel does for all of us. It had to happen. And it had to happen pre-Holocaust and post-Holocaust, that for Jews to have any form of any life, we had to have our own homeland. And here's a greater perspective. I don't know if Rabbi Grafman talked about this. There's 2 billion Muslims. There's 1.4 billion Catholics. I don't know, over 1 billion Christians, I'm going to assume. Over 1 billion Hindus. Over 1 billion Africans and African Americans altogether. Over 1 billion Chinese and Asian. There's 16 million Jews. We're insignificant. And the idea that we can't have a land smaller than New Jersey, think about this. The amount of focus. That's why Zionism is biblical Zionism. And Daniel, he was praying to Jerusalem 3 times a day. That's how we know to pray. He wasn't praying, you know, I guess it would be east. He wasn't praying east to Berlin or to America. Daniel was praying to Jerusalem 3 times a day to represent the three sacrifices. We pray, well, our synagogue the ark should be facing east, but it doesn't. Okay. We pray 3 times a day toward Jerusalem. So when I wrap tefillin, when I pray my own, I face east in my house. When I do a Shiva minyan, when someone passes away and I go to one's home, I make sure I take out my phone, I find the compass to know where east is. That's what we do, because Jerusalem is the center of the world and the center of time. You can read all the medieval theologians, Jewish theologians. So that's why, without Israel is the corpus of Jewish praxis. It's everything what we do is connected to our land. And Rabbi Grafman is the one who perfected that in the Reform perspective. Yeah. Not that controversial when you really think about it. Just everyone has a thing with the Jews, whether it's, you know, right-wing revisionism or left-wing. I've never seen anything like it before. That Winston Churchill was the bad guy during World War II. It's called right-wing. They call it the woke right now. There's new terminology. Yeah, that Winston Churchill was bad, Hitler was okay. I mean, if he just invaded Poland, it's nuts to me. It's nuts. Yes. So there's post-Holocaust theology. So after the destruction of the first temple, the second temple, we had to rationalize it. So after the destruction of the second temple, it was Hinat Sinam, baseless hatred toward one another. God caused the temple to be destroyed. Okay? I don't believe in a God like that, but that's what you thought back then. The Holocaust, so you have 6 million Jews died. We're just going to focus only on the Jewish story here. No disrespect to homosexuals and gypsies and other people who died, and I think 80 million Germans, how many Germans died? Millions of Germans died. For Jews, the question now became Hester Panim. It's the hidden fate. Where was God when this horrible thing happened? How could God redeemed us from Egyptian slavery after 400 years of Why did it take God 400 years? So there's, in Exodus 15, we say it every day, who is like you among the God? Who is like God? Nobody's like God. This is Miriam's song, in the Midrash, there's a pun. It's Michamocha ba'elim Adonai versus Elim. Elim Adonai. It says, who is like you, God, the mute? They accuse God of being silent for allowing slavery to happen to begin with. So when the Holocaust happened and when it was done, people got together and said, how do we come up with our own wrestling with God after this calamity happened to our people? And through decades, this academic research was written. It's called post-Holocaust theology. And you have some rabbis who believe God had to have it happen because of a Jewish secularity. These are these rabbis. Some of these rabbis went to America, raised funds for the yeshiva, probably went back to Europe and died and marched to their death proud as being martyrs. I'm not taking away their experience. On the other hand, they felt God's presence at Auschwitz-Birkenau between kindness toward people there. So that's post-Holocaust theology. And now we'll have post-October 7th theology. It hasn't started yet until I think the 6 remains are home, how longer, but until there's some type of closure, you will start seeing a mass of scholarship, of theology, trying to rationalize the worst atrocities committed to the Jewish, which it's my thesis, Hamas is worse than the Nazis. And the reason, were you guys there for my first class for that one? And the reason for that is there's an argument, Hannah Arendt, is that the argument was that the Nazis followed orders. In Nuremberg, that was their legal justification, a lot of them. Second, we know that the Nazis tried to hide their crimes. Third, in concentration camps, the Einzig group of the SS had to get Germans drunk. They had to give them drugs for them to do their executions because they were questioning the morality of their order. Some of these Jews they were heroes with during World War I. And it was really hard for a German. They would go into a room, there'd be a hole, and they would shoot the Jew behind, So many Germans had substance abuse problems and addiction because of what they had their own form of PTSD. There's scholarship in books about the German suffering because of what they did. Hamas, on the other hand, and there's a video I play of a guy who calls his mom and dad and says, I'm using their phone because I killed 10, not 10 Israelis, 10 Jews. 10 Jews, Allahu Akbar, Takbir, Takbir, God bless you, God bless you. So Yahya Sinwar, in his documents, they found his handwriting. He wanted to paint a picture of the worst atrocities, to burn people, to rape people, to cut their heads off, to play soccer with their heads, to cut off women's breasts. We know that one woman had over 30 strains of semen in her body after a post-rape. So the brutality of Hamas wanted to be open for the world to see. If you saw that movie with Deborah Lipstadt, where she sues the British Holocaust denier, David something, and libel, or slant, I always get those confused. They tried to hide all of their crimes. Hamas, on the other hand, they wanted the world to see. There's a certain form of, and denazification was possible because at the end of the day, Germans really liked themselves. And they were able to do it. And one of the first things they did was every German had to go to concentration camps to see what they did. They had to do that, okay? You've seen Band of Brothers, the second to last episode, Why We Fight. The Germans in that town went to the concentration camp and started burying the bodies. Hamas, on the other hand, when you have such an ideology driven by the Muslim Brotherhood, this is a different animal. Last question, I'll let you go to church. Yeah. This is going to be one of the most painful answers that I have to give. Sometimes we just don't know. And do I believe in God? Yes, and I have my own reasons for that. But do I believe a God who is invested in the outcomes of the world? No. Because why was I born in the Western Hemisphere to two parents? And I grew up never having to be in a position of wanting or needing. It's all pure luck to me, pure luck. Versus someone who's born in other parts of the world or the Amazon or inherent poverty or single parenthood. I do believe, though, that with merit and determination, we have the skills to, and I think the notion of working hard in merit has been replaced. So I would say that we're supposed to challenge where God is and where God isn't. And I think the more we maintain our faith, I still think we'll become better people. I think the world without God, whether it's Jesus, your Holy Spirit, I think it's an empty world. You guys, I've seen your faces here. You guys go to church. You make a conscious effort to come to church every Sunday, right? I'm going to say statistically, I don't know what's going on in your own lives, but at least when you come to church on Sundays, there's a form of certainty that gives you some type of not closure, of happiness, perspective, joy of being with your church community. Because if something bad happens, it's going to be your faith community is going to be the first one to respond. Is that an accurate assumption? It's our educator Elizabeth, her sister passed away a couple days ago. She's been suffering horrible Alzheimer's, hospice. Finally passed away. And the funeral in Israel, she died Friday morning. They do it Saturday night at 10 o'clock at night. Most people, they just rock and roll. And it's not like we do it with suits. And they just get there to the burial site, and they do the funeral. It's the way it's done there. But I called her last night, and I said, Elizabeth, you're going to Israel in a week. I said, what do you want to do? And I said, you're a member of this temple. What do you want to do? And she goes, you have to be an enforcer, but I said, I'm going to urge you to have some comfort and let people mourn with you. So we're doing something Wednesday night at 6 o'clock. We're going to have a Shiva minyan, because that's being in a faith community can make all the difference in the world. All right, go to church. I'll see you next. Come with more juicier questions.